to our session today, and thank you so much for making the time to be with us. My name is Lorraine Dixon, and I work with the Kenya Organization for Environmental Education, or KOEE, and we run the Green Key program in Kenya. And Green Key is an international eco-certification for tourism establishments. And basically, we promote sustainable practice in tourism. And we try to do it in a holistic manner where it's not just a checklist to get a certificate and a plaque at the end of the process, but it's really a quality management system for your tourism business, be it a hotel, be it a restaurant, or whichever other type of business you're running, so that you're able to truly understand and embrace sustainability and enjoy the benefits that come with it as well. So in light of everything that's been happening over the last few months, I think we have had a real spanner in the works thrown at us this year with the COVID-19 crisis. We felt it was an even more important time to be talking about sustainability because that's partly what's got us to the situation that we're in now. And for us to look at it through a new lens, particularly as we look at restarting our tourism, our businesses, and just trying to do things right as we restart tourism in our various places. So thank you so much for joining us. I will do a brief introduction of our expert speaker for today, who is Jo Hendricks. Joanne, she has over 20 years experience in the tourism sector. And she's actually a health and safety specialist along the lines of sustainability. And she will be taking us through practical points of what you can do in your business, even as you're working on improving on your standards of hygiene with all the health and safety protocols that we have in place now and all the standards that we have to meet. How can you do that without compromising on sustainability and compromising on the health of your guests as well as your staff? She's the founder at Travel Without Plastic, and she'll be telling us a bit more about what they do there and what you can do in your business. So I'll hand over to Jo now. Just a few housekeeping rules as well before we go. Kindly have your mic on mute until we get to the Q&A session. If you'll need to say something at that point, feel free to use the chat function. We'll be keeping an eye on that and keeping an eye out for any questions that Jo will address during the Q&A. Thank you. Welcome, Jo.
Great, thank you, Lorraine. It's really nice to be with everybody today. For the presentation, I'm going to switch off my video just to make sure that we have a good or as good a communication as possible. But I wanted to leave that on to say hello very quickly, if you can see me up at the top. And then I'm going to share my screen with you and present from there. So bear with me a second. Okay, so you should all be able to see the introductory slide there. If you can't, or if anything happens during the presentation, Lorraine, I'm sure, will let me know. So as I say, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have you with us today. Before we start properly, I would like to just extend my thanks to Finn Bolden-Thompson and Isabel Listener from the Green Key head office team, and with whom we've signed an official partnership agreement just last week. And also to Dr. Dorcas Otieno, who's the Executive Director for the Kenyan Organization of Environmental Education, for all of the great work that has been to date. And obviously a massive thanks to Lorraine for giving us the opportunity to present on hygiene and sustainability today. I think together all of us here can make a significant difference. Bear with me a second as I just look to move the presentation on, because that doesn't seem to be moving on. Oh, there we go. Okay. So today I'd just like to do a short introduction to Travel Without Plastic, and then to go straight into the 4 key steps that we use to help businesses avoid single-use plastic whilst maintaining hygiene standards. And then we'll use the majority of the time to share some actual examples and to go into some detail on the considerations. And I'm also hoping to learn something from yourselves today. If you do have any good examples you're happy to share in the chat, or any questions, we can capture those in the chat function. Now, we're also going to make the webinar interactive to keep it a bit more lively, so you're not just listening to me. And it would be useful for us just to take some time to prepare that now. So on the screen, you should see 2 options to join an application that's called Slido. Now, you can do this in 2 ways. If you have a QR reader on your mobile phone, you can just click to scan the QR reader, and you need to enter in the number 25083 as the event code. Or if you want to join on the computer that you're watching on, or the tablet that the screen that you're watching us on now, open a new window and go to slido.com, and you'll get the joining as a participant message that you can see there on the left hand side, and you just enter the same code 25083. And what should happen when you do that is you will find that we've got an active poll. And so there are 3 questions in the poll. And once you're in, it would be great if you would just take the time to answer those questions and submit your answers. And I'll be able to see if you're doing that from the counter that's on the screen there. So I'll give you just a few minutes to do that. If anybody is having problems getting in, please just let us know in the chat, and Lorraine can let me know about that, because I can't see that on my screen. Okay, so that's 1 person submitted. That's great. 2, off we go. Brilliant. And I think when I last looked, there were 10 or 12 of us in the webinar, so I'll wait for the counter to move up a little bit. If you can't access this for any reason, or you prefer not to access it, that's fine. You can also watch as the presentation goes forward on my computer. But we will be holding a quiz at the end of the presentation using this Slido application. And there will be a prize for that quiz, where we would like to be able to offer whoever wins the quiz a 30-minute consultation with me directly to help you look at some opportunities to minimise plastic and still meet hygiene expectations in your business. So it could be very well worth joining. Okay, I'll give you a few more minutes there. Are there any items in the chat there, Lorraine, where people are having difficulties? I can just see a couple of chats coming in. I'll just give a 30 more seconds or so. Okay, so we've had 6 responses for now, but there are 14 participants in total, so it may be that some of you are not managing to get in. I'll just explain that one more time. So you have a QR reader on your phone, you can scan the QR code that you'll see in the left of the screen, and then you enter the number there, 25083, and that will take you into the active poll that you can see on the screen. Or if you want to do that on a computer, you minimize the window that you're watching this presentation on, join at slido.com, and it will ask you to just join directly as a participant, no download, nothing else needed, and you just put 25083. And we can come back to this later, so we'll let's move on from there and see if it gives us any information as to who we've got in the call today and where we're represented from. So answers at the moment show that we've the vast majority of people are from a hotel, but tour operators as well, NGOs, government agency, private lodgings. Fantastic. Okay. The roles that are represented, excellent. Supervisor, manager, sustainability and communications officer, brilliant. So a variety of roles there. That's really interesting to see. Okay, and my favourite one so far. Great, that's fabulous. How is your week going so far? That's very positive, which is really great to see. Fantastic. I am having an equally great week, but I would also agree with whoever it was that put intense there as one of their responses. Okay, fantastic. Right, I'm going to move us on. We will come back to Slido, so keep that open in the background if you have it open, because we'll be using it later for another poll and for the quiz at the end. So let me move on with the presentation. I think just the slide switching just takes a little bit longer. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, so just a quick introduction for those of you that aren't familiar with the work of Travel Without Plastic. Our experience of helping hotels to reduce plastic waste goes way back to 2011, but we didn't make it a total focus until we founded Travel Without Plastic in 2017. And then in 2018, we launched our first version of the Let's Reduce single-use guide and toolkit, and we update this every year. And we've always helped businesses through these tools to navigate the balance between hygiene, safety, sustainability, and the guest experience. But in July this year, we updated the guide to make sure that the health and safety advice was more clearly highlighted, and we summarised the recommendations around plastic and illness outbreaks in a separate chat so that they could be more easily accessible. We've also undertaken a range of workshops and webinars over the past couple of years, training staff from over 200 hotels and accommodations. We're obviously doing more webinars at the moment for COVID reasons. And we also work on destination-specific projects. We've helped to set up plastic-free Lao in Southeast Asia, plastic-free holidays on the islands of Mallorca and Ibiza, close to Spain, and we've done projects in West Africa with a partner organisation there, Asset. But this is our first webinar for businesses in Kenya, and as I said at the start, I hope I can share some relevant insight with you today, but I think I'll also learn a lot of new things from the challenges, the opportunities, and the successes that you share with us. I think for me, it's always important to cover why we are so determined to do this work right at the beginning of any workshop. And I'm sure I don't need to tell many of you about the negative impacts of plastic, not just on the environment, but on our health as well. And there are some statistics that really stand out for me that I wanted to share with you, because it's those things that drive me every day to continue doing the work that we do. And as a global community, we're producing at the moment around 350 million tonnes of plastic every year. And about half of that is for single use. Between 5 million and 13 million tonnes are estimated to end up in the oceans every year. Out of all of that plastic, it's estimated that 91% of it is never, ever recycled. Additionally, around 1 million seabirds and 100,000 marine mammals are killed every year as a result of plastic pollution. But also, for every kilo of plastic that's produced, they estimate 6 kilos of carbon dioxide is produced. And plastic production from virgin fossil fuels is the equivalent to the consumption in the aviation sector. If you look at this potential air pollution, around 7 million people die every year from diseases related to air pollution, whilst millions more suffer headaches, respiratory diseases, organ impairment, irritation, etc. Just as I'm presenting, there's a microphone that's not on mute. So if you're not muted, it would be great if you could check that you're on mute so we don't distract from the presentation. That'd be great, thank you. And in places where waste management facilities are not very well developed, solid waste is often disposed of inappropriately, including via open incineration. Researchers estimate around 40% of the world's garbage is actually burned, and this is contributing to some very dangerous toxins in the air, which are harmful to human beings. And of course, in other ways, these plastics are harmful to us. There are over 114 species of marine animals now that have been found to contain microplastics, and some of these end up on our plates. Scientists believe that there are 5.5 trillion macro and microplastics floating in the oceans, and that number, it can almost be too difficult to even comprehend. So I like to think about it by comparing it to a time frame. So if you look at the amount of seconds, the number of seconds in terms of time, 1 million seconds is 11 days. That's the equivalent of 11 days. 1 billion seconds is actually the equivalent of 31 years. And 1 trillion seconds is the equivalent of 31,000 years. So when we're talking about 5.5 trillion pieces of plastic in the oceans, it might help us to visualize this a little bit better. And they're found everywhere now. A year or so back, there was a study done on the average number of plastic particles found in bottled water, and that was 325 plastic particles per litre of bottled water being sold, with about half the amount being found in tap water. So when we hear statistics like these, it can sometimes be difficult to believe that the problem's so big. How can our individual actions make any impact? But if you do start to feel like that at any point, and sometimes I do, but I always remember this image, that our choices do matter, and we can be part of the solution or we can be part of the problem. We can be determined, or we could just be overwhelmed by it all and feel that we can't do anything. And I choose determined, and more so because when I look at this now with a coronavirus lens, I just think there's got to be a better way. We can't just keep turning back to single-use plastics. If we continue to omit sustainability from decisions we make today, then we're just storing up more problems for the future. And the COVID pandemic is making us do some very strange things, which is why the approach is even more important now. And these are this is an actual photograph used by a transfer company. They put this on LinkedIn as a promotional way to show their guests that they were helping them to be more hygienic. Actually, it didn't go down very well. It certainly didn't enhance their reputation as a business, as most people saw the completely unnecessary plastic waste. And we are seeing a lot of overreaction with a focus on single use. But of course, in many cases, it has been a knee-jerk reaction, a very quick reaction, because COVID hit us very quickly and there wasn't really much time to plan. But the thing is, single-use plastic is not actually inherently safer, because viruses and bacteria can live on single-use items in the same way that they can live on any other surface. So just wrapping something in a using items made from single use doesn't prevent the spread of infection. The plastic filled use item will still need to be handled. And if they aren't cleaned and disinfected properly, then they just become a vehicle for transmission as well. And in June this year, over 125 scientists have released a statement to that effect. The single biggest thing that we can all do to prevent the spread of infection and to reduce plastic is to have robust cleaning and hygiene procedures in place. And so how do we do this as a business? So there are 4 key steps that we would recommend that you take. Firstly, to identify your current impact in terms of consumption and cost. Define what's truly necessary and what you could consider unnecessary. And then create new processes and procedures instead of rushing out to buy single-use products. And extremely importantly, reassuring your guests and customers that you've got this. You know, that what are you doing exactly to be able to reduce single use, that you're keeping them safe. And we'll go through some of these examples just now in a little bit more detail. So we've probably all heard the saying that you can't manage what you don't measure. So it's important to know the baseline consumption and cost. And you can do this by just walking around your business, making a list of all the single-use plastic items that you see. Maybe use receipts or invoices or purchasing spreadsheets, whatever means you have to track consumption and cost, so that you can identify these statistics and know how much plastic you are getting through and what the cost is to your business. And then this will help you to prioritize and plan a budget, but you'll also be able to track your impact, and that makes for a great story later on. And then have a very honest conversation about what is necessary, and don't let years of habit or brand standards define what needs to be necessary now. It actually seems in some ways that COVID-19 is helping us to change the mindset around standards such as amenities in hotels, for instance. The more touch points there are in any business, the more opportunity there is to spread infection. So removing unnecessary items not only reduces single-use plastic, but it can save costs, and it can reduce the emissions associated with constant deliveries of unnecessary stock. And we're starting to realise now, I think, as an industry, that these things are not a sign of quality, but more a visual communication that we don't really care too much for the environment, or that we're not taking the steps to keep our guests safe. And it would be interesting to see what other unnecessary products you will find if you look through the lens of waste reduction. And then rather than returning to single-use plastic, rather than wrapping a television remote control or an air conditioning remote control or in plastic, or using single-use items, create processes to clean and disinfect properly so that you don't need to generate the unnecessary waste. So as we've said, the plastic film around a remote control wouldn't make it any safer. It just means you have to clean and disinfect the film to make things safer rather than the control. And obviously it takes a bit longer to disinfect the remote control, but actually to properly disinfect, you usually need to leave that disinfecting or sanitizing solution on the product for at least 1 full minute, possibly longer, depending on the product, to make sure that you are actually killing any germs that might be on that surface. So processes need to include additional time for proper cleaning and disinfecting, whether this is a single-use product or a reusable product. And it can often help to write those processes down. Even if you work alone, just helps you to remember what you're doing. And for large teams, it's very, very important that all of the staff are trained in those new processes and they understand the importance of their role. And finally, one of the main reasons we hear that businesses are using single-use plastic at the moment is to create the feeling of reassurance. But again, that's just it. Many times it is just a feeling. It's a perception that single-use plastic is better, and actually it might even make things worse. The fact that people feel safer means they could be less likely to follow hygiene procedures as closely. And a good example of that is plastic gloves. I mean, I see here, I don't know whether you experience it there, but many people with plastic gloves will constantly still touch things because they believe their hands to be clean. And of course, their hands are clean, but the gloves aren't. And it would be much better to focus on hand washing than using products. So you can think about all the ways you can connect with your customers to tell them what you're doing and to help them feel reassured that you're taking health and safety and hygiene seriously, and also to help them understand what they can do to be part of that solution. But change is challenging. We're not saying that any of this is necessarily going to be easy. Not everybody likes change, and in the beginning it might be harder. But don't give up after maybe just 1 or 2 complaints. Engage with your guests and your customers to explain why you're doing this. And if it helps, just do one thing at a time. You do one thing and get it right, it can make you feel very positive, empowered, motivated to carry on. Whereas if you do many things at once, or you try to take too many things on, you can sometimes lose control of that, and maybe you don't get the results you hoped for, and you become demotivated and you stop trying. So at this point, it would be useful for me to know from yourselves whether or not COVID has impacted your business in any way when it comes to single-use plastic. And so if you still have your Slido screen open, whether you've got that on the telephone or you've got it on the computer, you'll see that there are 4 questions to ask in the active poll. And if you didn't manage to join us earlier on the Slido poll, there are 2 ways to join. If you have a QR reader on your phone, just hover over the QR code there at the top and enter the reference 25083 when you go in. Or actively, you can do it on a computer, minimize the screen that you're watching us on just now, and open a new window, go directly to slido.com, and you can put that reference number in without needing to download or to load any apps. You can just go straight in. So it would be really interesting for me just to see how COVID has impacted your business when it comes to travel, when it comes to single-use plastic. So if I could ask you to take some time just to fill in that poll and submit your answers at the end. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. We'll be able to see as answers come in, because the little counter in the top of my screen will start to move. So I'll just let you take some time to do that. Okay, so just 2 responses so far. If anybody else is going to join, there's 3, lovely. We'll give you another minute or so to do this, because it would be great to get as much input as we can. So again, if you're not sure how to join, if you have a QR reader on your mobile phone, you can just scan the code in the top left there of the presentation, and it will ask you for the reference number 25083. Or if you're on a laptop, minimize this screen that you're watching us on and open a new window, go straight to slido.com, and you just put the reference number straight in to join as a participant. No need to download or load anything on the computer. I'll give you a few more seconds. We had 8 responses on the first Slido poll, so there's 4 out of 14. Wait a few more seconds to see if anyone else is going to submit their answer, and then we'll share those inputs on screen. Thank you. There's 5 there, fantastic. Okay, we'll start to take a look at the first question in there. If you're still completing, please feel free to do that because it will count as we go along. So I wanted to understand from those of you that have joined us today, whereabouts you were on your plastic journey, you know, pre-COVID. So that's great to see that we've had a number of participants already taking some steps. And some of you that hadn't just yet, so hopefully you'll be inspired by some of the input that we share with you today. And very interesting to see habit comes out as one of the biggest issues that most hotels and hospitality businesses that we work with share. And it seems that you are also having that same issue. Customer trust is very interesting. That's where communications are obviously key. And we will cover a little bit of that later on. Brand standards and changing the mindset. Fantastic, thank you for those answers. And let's have a look at which single-use plastic product you are most keen to reduce. So packing bottles, water bottles, amenities, straws and cutlery hopefully will answer a lot of those questions for you today and at least give you some ideas and something to think about and hopefully inspire. And finally, how confident are you? Great, there's a good mix there. And if you're not really sure, that's absolutely fine, but it's a really, it's a challenging place to be at the moment, and to know whether you're doing the right thing or not, whether you're choosing the right products or not, the right procedures, hopefully will also help you to get through some of those initial thoughts as we move through the presentation. So it will just take a couple of minutes to move on once we come out of the Slido screens. Bear with me for a second. Okay. What I'd like to do now for the next 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes, is to look at some practical recommendations. And whilst this is titled accommodation providers, you might find that a lot of the ideas in this section also work well for conferences and events, restaurants and cafes in general. So there will be input there that would be useful for many different types of business. But it's important to say, you know, not everything that we suggest here would work for every business, but the ideas might help you to think about what could work for you or what variations you could make so that you could implement these ideas in your business. And so aside from bottled water and packaging, one of the biggest areas of plastic use is the guest bathroom. And that's often down to those habits and brand standards that we've just identified. And this is where we've looked at a different set of 3 R's. And our 3 R's to think about in terms of guest bathrooms are remove, request, and refill. Now, you may be prepared to, you may have done already, remove amenities completely, with the exception of soap or hand washing gel, of course, that you should always provide and preferably buy locally. If you do use soaps and you find you have leftover soap, there are many organisations now that can help you to do good with those, such as the Eco Soap Bank or the Diversey Soap for Hope programme I know are available in Kenya. These days, many people actually do prefer to travel with their own toiletries anyway. But if it does feel a step too far for you to remove everything completely, you could still remove them from the guest room, but let them know that toiletries and amenities are available on request. We've done this before with many hotels, and very few people generally come down to request them. So the cost savings and the waste reduction can be quite significant. And there are a range of opportunities around refills now, and there's a lot we could say on that, and you will find a blog on the Travel Without Plastic website that will go into much more detail than we have time to here on all of the different options for toiletries to help you decide which could be the best option for you. Whatever you do, try to be consistent in your approach. What do we mean by this? So it can be quite tempting to switch to single-use amenities that are made from other materials. But before you do, we want you to go back to that step 2 and ask yourself if the product you are replacing has been used purely because of habit or a brand standard. You know, when you have things like combs or single-use cotton balls, that they're not much better just because they're wrapped in paper or they're made from bamboo. They're still creating single-use waste, and they're often generally more expensive. If you tell guests that you are reducing plastic by switching to refillables, for example, but other items in the room are still made from plastic, like water bottles you can see on the screen there, that's not a problem. Just be sure to make sure you tell your guests that you're taking steps towards reducing single-use plastic so you don't look like you're contradicting yourself. But remember though, if you do say this, you need to mean it. If Green Key auditors, for instance, were to attend your premises and see this today, know that you're making those steps, that would probably be fine. If they come back in 12 months and see the same thing and it's clear that you're not continuing with the steps, then you might fail those questions. So consistency and communication is really key there. I'm just waiting for the slides to move on. Bear with me a second. It's also very tempting at the moment to replace single-use amenities with these COVID kits that we've seen in a few places. Obviously, we would highly recommend against it. You can provide sufficient hand sanitizing stations throughout your premises to help avoid the need for guests or customers to carry so many miniature plastic bottles. If you do feel it necessary, you maybe could make masks and sanitizers and those types of things available for sale. But if you do, it would also be great to tell your customers how to responsibly dispose of those things when you've finished with them. Maybe you could even consider the sale of reusable masks too. I think it's important for us to remember that the COVID-19 could be with us for, 12 months, maybe even 2 years, that the single-use plastic that we're using today could be with us for hundreds of years. And we can't keep returning to single-use plastic every time we have an illness outbreak. We do need to find a better balance. And technology and innovation is obviously huge at the moment, particularly when it comes to touch-free technology, touch-free water and choices. There are more and more of those available now, and we're also seeing the integration of QR codes and apps. We spoke with a hotel manager just last week who told us he's looking into technology where Curtains, lights, televisions, etc. are all controlled by the guest's own mobile phone, which significantly reduces touch points that require cleaning in the room. Some of these will work for you, some of those won't, but it just goes to show you what's out there and how we can widen our scope of thinking when it comes to looking for alternatives. Bottled water, that came up as one of your biggest challenges, and it's by far the #1 plastic item consumed by hotels and hospitality businesses that we work with. But there are a good range of alternatives. So it's about working out what's best for you. And how you decide water will probably come down to who your customers are and where they will actually take the water. So if you're an accommodation provider or you have a premises and the water quality is good enough, you can filter and bottle your own water on site, serving it in glass bottles or by the glass, and you can charge for that. Or if you provide water free of charge, maybe you would enable guests to fill up at dispensers. Most filter companies now are, if they haven't done already, offering touch-free dispensers or pedal-operated dispensers. And you can check with your local suppliers to see if they have those options. And they're also quite a good option for restaurants as well. If water quality is an issue though, or if filter systems are too expensive, increasingly companies are offering water in returnable glass bottles, which creates a circular loop, and also a service in large plastic carafes, such as those you can see from Aquamist there on the screen. So you can serve water from those carafes. And whichever system works best for you, there are a range of suppliers now in Kenya. And all of these will help you to reduce single-use plastic waste and drive towards a more circular economy. And hopefully the more demand for these products, the more likely you would be to enjoy economies of scale. But it is important to create hygiene processes relevant to whichever system you choose. And if you're an accommodation provider, it can be a good idea to get your health and safety consultants, if you have them, involved in that. And just a very quick additional note on osmosis and filter systems. Sometimes they can create a lot of wastewater. So if you're going to install, a good idea to look at ways you can capture that wastewater efficiently, maybe for use in gardens or swimming pools. There's not much point in us solving one problem only to create another. And obviously sustainability audits and those such as Green Key will look at more issues and not just plastic reduction. And the type of bottle is actually also an important consideration. If you refill water and bottle it on site yourselves, then bottles with wide and very short necks are much better for hygiene, as water doesn't tend to collect in them when they're drained upside down. Glass bottles are obviously not usually permitted at pools and beaches, so you would need to think about non-breakable alternatives. And if you do provide reusable bottles, you need to think about how you can enable your guests to have those washed properly on a daily basis. So maybe guests return their bottle at the end of the day like they would with a beach towel, and they swap it for a clean one. And so that goes on throughout. By including it in the cost of a room rate, or if you need to ensure it's return so that you can carry on using it, maybe that would require the implementation of a deposit system. And you need to give some thought to how that could work for you. But there are some really good ways to communicate this so that it comes across as a positive. And it's also important to communicate the hygiene measures so that guests are assured that any reusable bottles are treated the same as other reusable cutlery, plates, etc. When it comes to dishwashing. You might also need to make changes in kitchens and washing areas for additional facilities or for storage. If your business is closed at the moment or operating on a minimal capacity, it is a good idea to think about that, think about the work that needs to be done, and maybe plan those budgets against the return on investment so you can work out what is best for you. Another way to look at serving water is, potentially you might want to attract new customers or add value to your current offer. So you could become a refill site. and this is particularly useful for restaurants or cafes. And you could then promote yourselves to organisations leading tours as a place to stop during the itinerary to refill on water, coffee and other refreshments. If you run excursions and itineraries yourselves, maybe you could identify places where you can stop and let guests refill their water so that you can avoid taking lots of single-use plastic bottles onto the excursion. It's a great way to avoid plastic bottles going into conservation areas following the new ban that came into force this year. And it's important to remember as well, refills don't have to be free of charge. You can charge for customers to refill and to cover your costs, but it's a good idea to make that charge lower than bottled water. Maybe as an excursion operator, you might cover the cost of water, and that would prevent and minimise queuing and messing about and delays that would be caused by that. And you can also encourage guests to buy food and snacks while they're in these restaurants and cafes to maximise revenue to small businesses. Refill dispensers like the one that you can see on the right would probably need to be moved into a staff serving area for now to ensure hygiene standards and that staff are serving the water rather than customers helping themselves. Or if you have touch-free technology, that can be used. And I'll share 4 top tips in a minute about how you could do refills for water and coffee that are completely contactless. But if we stick to plastic bottles for the meantime, if you need to continue with single use and give priority to bottles that already contain recycled content, and then ensure that you continue to properly separate your bottles for recycling. This helps to drive a circular economy. Taka Taka have 2 sorting sites in Kenya. They actually sort waste into 45 different fractions and subsequently recycle them. And PET, PET bottles, are very welcome here, as is glass, newspaper and aluminium. What we would advise is to avoid providing refreshments in materials that are not accepted by the destination waste infrastructures. So it's a good idea to check with them to find out exactly what they can take. Other options, of course, would involve getting involved with a eco-brick exchange scheme. Not only does that save waste from plastic bottles, but you can also fill them with all sorts of other types of non-recyclable plastics. And it's worth checking out eco-brick organisations in your area, checking what the procedures are now. Can you get gas involved with making the eco-bricks? Can you provide a place to deposit non-recyclable plastics? Or if you operate excursions, can you and could you take them for recycling? That's a great unique selling point, and it demonstrates your commitment to keeping plastics out of the environment and in a circular economy loop. But I think it's really important to remember that recycling is a great place to start, but it's a terrible place to stop. We can't recycle our way out of the amount of plastic waste that they're creating, and our first step should always be focused on reduction. So let's move on, take a quick look now at food and beverages, whether they're served on premises but also the to-go market, the food to-go market. That's one of the more difficult sectors to reduce plastic. And what we come back to again there is step 1 that we looked at before, and that's to identify what single-use plastics are already being used in your businesses. And if we look at beverages, you know, what type of plastics are you using to serve hot and cold beverages? Is everything absolutely necessary? Does your standard operating procedure at the moment require you to decorate cocktails with 2 straws when actually you could remove all of these decorations and make straws available on request? There are, again, on our website, we've got 2 blogs on straws to help you identify the best single-use straw and the best reusable straw for your business, because we don't have time to go into all of that here, and so take a look at that later on. But also think about all of the other things. You know, do you automatically give customers spoons and stirrers if they don't need them? What types of cups and glasses are you using? Do you always need to provide the lid with a single-use cup? What kind of tray do you use for people to take drinks off site? And how could you encourage customers to drink on site and use ceramic cups and stainless steel cutlery instead? Could it be a discount or a loyalty card or something that would encourage them to stay on site? And how can you encourage guests to use their own reusable coffee cups and water bottles? I don't know how many of you will be familiar with the coffee chains that started to refuse reusable coffee cups when COVID first started. Again, it was a very common knee-jerk reaction, when in fact there's actually a very simple 4-step process that you can see on the screen that does make it easy to use reusable cups hygienically. I'll give you a few seconds just to read that, but it's a similar process that you could also follow for bottled water. You could simply dispense water into a jug, transfer that to the bottle in the same way that it's described here for contactless coffee, or you may find that you've got other ways that work for you as well. Obviously, self-service buffets are no longer allowed, so it does require a totally new approach to food service. Room service is likely to become more popular in hotels and accommodations, and it can be provided in a way that avoids single use. You will need to ensure processes are there to hygienically retrieve the room service items. You might also think about how you can pre-portion foods that can be served in reusable dishes. This might mean having to cut back slightly on the number of choices on the menu to make this a realistic option. These types of salad bowls and yogurts with fruit can be served by staff directly to customers. For outside dining, festivals or events, maybe you don't have enough reusable dishes, you could consider palm leaf plates or other types of leaf plates that can be disposed of directly with food so that they don't add to the plastic problem. And the added bonus of pre-portioning food like this is also a reduction in food waste. So you can actually tick a number of sustainability boxes by taking these steps, and it's also great to reduce carbon emissions, and it creates some quite significant cost savings. If guests are going out for the day and if they also return to your hotel at the end of that day, could you possibly provide lunch in reusable containers, stainless steel boxes, or even thermal flasks for hot food like soup? And they can be returned at the end of the day and go through the dishwasher. If that's difficult, too expensive, or guests are on a moving itinerary, which means they won't return, or you're a restaurant or a business that creates food on the go, then there are cardboard and other single-use options. Again, it's important to think about the waste infrastructure when you make your decision here. And it is really good actually to see that the plastic ban in conservation areas does recommend reusable alternatives where possible, and certainly more natural alternatives. And it's great to see that they avoid suggesting industrially compostable products because I believe that there isn't the infrastructure there to be able to process those. Another good material is bagasse. If you need to insulate hot food, that tends to break down in about 6 weeks or so. You can also think about what needs to go into those picnics or those takeaways, and choose things that don't require packaging, like bananas, for instance. If you're an excursion provider, though, you could completely take away the picnic lunch, and you could stop at a local restaurant. Now, that might require adding significant extra time into the programme. It might not be possible for you. You'd also need to find suitable restaurants on the way. So it does need some planning, but it's a great way to think about bringing revenue to other businesses, especially if those businesses offer water and coffee refills. We've seen that that's a great opportunity for guests. And it's also wise to plan in hand washing stops, so to stop at places where people can easily hand wash rather than rely on cleaning wipes, because they are mostly made from plastic and they are a severe nuisance to wildlife. So moving on, what we've discussed around food and beverage service and many of the points earlier can also be applied to events and conferences as well. But there are some specifics to think about in terms of plastic reduction. And the key one there would be to avoid unnecessary merchandise, even those that are made from sustainable materials. Now that might sound controversial, but honestly, I've lost count of the amount of reusable bottles and reusable bags that I was being offered and that I have in my cupboards at home. So I stopped accepting these. A huge amount of resources goes into making a cotton bag or a stainless steel bottle. And so if they sit in a cupboard and they're never used again because you've got so many of them, then it's very, very poor use of resources. But if you do feel that you would like to provide some kind of souvenir, there are lots of options that are a little bit more innovative now, like plantable pencils that come with seeds at the end. There's a company called Momo in Nairobi that are offering these at the moment, and they actually have a really good sustainability ethos as a company. There's also seed paper, so the lanyard that you see there, the name would actually be written on. It's a seeded paper, and that can be planted once it's been used to create flowers or herbs. And if you do use lanyards, you can collect those back in for reuse after they've been sanitized. But what about other things like a voucher or a voucher code for people to buy something from a local business, or maybe you even give people the gift of a donation. So for instance, for every guest or every delegate that attends your event or conference, you donate, I don't know, 120 Kenyan shillings to a cleanup organisation or a tree planting organisation or something similar. So there are ways that you can stand out by looking at that. And of course, obviously, things we're doing today, the ultimate waste-free event is how we're doing this on Zoom. I do admit, though, it's not the same as having events in person. I do now really miss getting together with people, but in the current situation, it obviously saves a lot on travel and associated emissions, certainly avoids waste and doesn't require disinfection. And then moving towards the end now, as a very last resort, if we have to continue to use single-use plastic, we need to do everything that we possibly can to make sure it doesn't become litter. The issue with plastic waste is that it is very lightweight. And even if you dispose of it in a litter bin, it can easily blow out of that bin if it doesn't have a lid. So it's important to help your guests, your customers, your staff to understand what can be recycled and what can't. I mean, the estimates are now that it takes 450 years for a single-use mask to break down. And I don't think we want these to become the next, in the top 10 of items that we're collecting on beach cleans. It's also really important, though, to say at this point that for any waste that could potentially be contaminated, it's really important to follow the local regulations around the correct disposal of that. But in all of the cases, remember that prevention is better than having to deal with waste in the first place. And we'll just take, as we come to the end, a very quick look at how you can minimise the amount of plastic used during cleaning processes. Firstly, I think it is important to know that the vast majority, I would probably say 99% of cleaning wipes are not flushable, even if they say they are flushable on the packet. It's also important to remember that in order to kill germs, cleaning solutions need to stay wet on the surface that they're cleaning for anything up to a minute, possibly even longer, depending on the product. And that's highly unlikely to be achieved with a cleaning wipe. And in the worst case scenario, they could actually spread germs around rather than cleaning them up if they're not used properly. So it's a good idea to stick to reusable cleaning cloths, preferably from natural materials, not those that will shed microfibers into the water. And solutions are left for the right amount of time to actually work, and that cleaning cloths are changed regularly. And because of all of the new protocols, that there is obviously going to be an increase in chemical use. And whilst not directly related to plastic, it probably is true that most of your cleaning chemicals are provided in plastic packaging, whether that's large bulk bottles or individual bottles. So it can be really useful to look for suppliers of cleaning products who take their packaging back so that it can be reused and reused. I think that's a service that Diverthy in Kenya already offer at the moment. You know, this type of plastic is very robust. It's designed to be used again and again and again, and not just once. But there are other new innovations like stabilized aqueous ozone, for instance, where you would just constantly refill your own cleaning bottles from a machine that you would have on site in the hotel or the premises. And that's also a very safe solution. So you don't need to use so much personal protective equipment with that. And there's no toxic chemical use. But in all situations, it's a good idea to seek advice on cleaning processes. Don't overuse chemicals if you don't need to. Sometimes just good old plain soap and hot water will do the trick, but certainly seek professional advice on that. There's obviously a lot more that we could do and we could talk through that we don't have time to do today, and I'm conscious that you've spent a lot of time listening to me. What we will be doing very shortly is our sister site, greenerguest.com, will be launching a free e-learning course on hygiene and plastic at the end of this month. I'm sure Lorraine will share the details with you when that's live, and that should hopefully be interesting and something interactive that keeps your attention span. But what I'd like to do before we finish up and go to Q&A is just move to an interactive quiz. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the winner of the quiz will be entitled to a session, a 30-minute session directly with me to help them to understand their own opportunities to reduce single-use plastic and still meet hygiene standards. So if you head over back into the Slido, I'm just going to set that up. Whilst I'm setting that up, actually, because it's gone off my telephone and I need to reset it. Are there any questions that are standing out at the moment, Lorraine, that you would like to ask, just as I get the technology to work?
Thank you very much, Jo. That was really interesting, and I hope everyone else has been learning from it as well. I don't have any questions at the moment. Perhaps I could open it up to anyone else that has any specific questions, because this is more your time really to get to interact with Jo and get clarification on anything that might be you might be struggling with, or you might have been thinking about but not quite moved on with, that she could touch on while we're on. Anybody? Feel free to unmute yourself and just introduce yourself and ask your question.
Maybe we, I've got the tech ready, so if maybe we do the quiz and that's done and then we go into the questions, do you think?
Yeah, you could do. Oh, yeah, I can see someone's unmuted, but Oma, would you be okay to wait until after the quiz? I can see you've unmuted yourself. Thanks. Yeah, I think we'll move on to the quiz. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Oma. We'll get to you after the quiz.
Okay, so let me just check this. You should, on your screens now, you should be able to see, if you go into Slido where we were before, that there are 10 questions. You need to just register yourself for the quiz. So you need to join the quiz. At this point, you'll put your name in. If you don't want to put your real name, it's fine. As long as if you win, you identify yourself at the end. So we've got Lorraine and Marie. Oh, excellent. A few more. I was going to say, I don't think Lorraine's going to be allowed to win this one, if you get all the questions right, Lorraine.
No, I think I can pass on this one.
To join in.
I can pass.
You can still answer, definitely. I don't think you'll be allowed to accept as the winner. So if you'd like to join the quiz, if you didn't connect to the Slido earlier on, I'll just explain that again in case technology has let you down for any reason. If you have a QR reader on your phone, then you can just literally scan the QR code and it will ask you for the reference, which you can see on the screen, 25083, or you can go on directly on your computer and you just put in slido.com and you put in the code 25083. You don't have to download anything. It's really quite easy. So we've got 5 people in, 6 people in. I'll give you a couple more minutes. I want everybody to have an opportunity to win, obviously, the consultation session. Sorry that we had a slight issue starting the quiz. Okay, so 6 people in. Anybody else wanting to join? If you don't want to join, that's not a problem. You can follow the quiz on my presentation screen and you'll be able to see the questions and the answers as we go through. I'm going to do a 30-second countdown in my head for anybody else. When you answer, it doesn't show your name when you answer, so you don't need to be worried. And it's not about right and wrong anyway, it's really just a bit of fun. But if that's putting you off joining, don't worry, it doesn't show your name. That's 8 of you in, fantastic. Okay. Right, I'm going to start the quiz. So what will happen now in your interactive Slido, you should see the first question, and that's around plastic recycling, and it's asking, since plastic was first created in the 1950s, what percentage of it has actually been recycled? Once you've answered, you send your answer, and I'll be able to watch on the counter on the screen to make sure the 8 people that joined have all had a chance to put their answer in before we move on. Okay, so that's 7 responses. Just waiting on one more, I think. It will continue to count anyway as we go through. So I'll click on, because I'm conscious of your time today. You've spent a lot of time with us already. Okay, so there are a range of answers from everybody. The correct answer is actually only 9%. So it's a bit of a trick question. Earlier on, I told you the percentage that hadn't been recycled, which was at 91%. So move on to the next question. Seabirds and marine mammals as a result of plastic, which the below would be the correct statement around the numbers? And choose the answer you think is right and send that in. Okay, we're up to 7 answers there again. So I'm thinking there's 7 of you that are actively taking part. Let's have a look. Oh, there's 8. No, plastic. Okay, so 100,000 seabirds and 1 million marine mammals is the majority answer. Let's take a look at what's actually the correct answer. And it's actually 1 million seabirds and 100,000 marine mammals that are killed annually from single-use plastic. Let's take a look at the next question. Can you remember how many kilos of CO2 is produced for every kilo of plastic when I talked about air pollution earlier? Do you come still? Seven. Wait for one more. As I say, it will count as we go through anyway. So let's take a look. There we are, 8 of you in, fantastic. The majority going for 6 kilos, which is the right answer. Congratulations if you got that one right. Okay, next question. True or false? There are 5.5 trillion microplastics estimated to be floating in our oceans. A mind-boggling number. True or false? I don't know how they actually count this. Okay, just waiting on 2 more. One more. Fantastic. Let's take a look at the results. And the correct is actually true. Let's move to the halfway point. We've got 5 questions out of 10. What are the 4 steps according to Travel Without Plastic to reducing plastic and maintaining hygiene standards? You get them in the right order. Half of you have answered, 5 have answered. 3 more to go. Okay, the last one should be coming in shortly. Okay, fantastic. And let's see. And the correct answer is number 1, correct in terms of what was on the screen, but anything that you do out of these steps obviously is a great way to reduce plastic and to maintain hygiene. What I want to do just now is point, so it will actually show how we're doing. Okay. I'm not sure who commitment on the 4 Ps is, but at the moment you're doing really well. How the leaderboard works is that if there are the same amount of people with the same amount of right answers, it gives us the people who have responded in the quickest amount of time. Okay, so let's move on to the next 5 questions. Most single-use items made from bioplastic need to be disposed of in what way? Choose your answer there and send that in. Two more to go, I think. So 2 more answers to come in. Yeah, there we go. Okay, fantastic. And it is an industrial home composting facility for most of the bioplastics these days, unless they're certified as home compostable, they do need to go. Our next question. Again, just according to Travel Without Plastic, what are the 3 R's associated? Send your answer in. Are you able to send the answer in there? The 3 R's associated with guest bathroom amenities. There we go. Just 2 responses there. Is anybody else going to respond to this one? There we go, a few more. Okay, I'll move it on because it will connect and add up all of your results. Even if you've not voted, it will do it anyway. Okay, and the correct answer there is obviously yes, remove first, request and refill. We've put them in that order so that we minimise the amount of waste that is generated. This should be quite an easy one because we've just covered this towards the end. True or false? Cleaning wipes that are labelled flushable can be flushed without causing problems to the environment. True or false? Five responses for that one. Any more for any more? Okay, let's take a look at the results for this one. And it is actually a false thing. Most of them cannot be flushed without causing problems, whether it's in your plumbing pipes or they make it into the environment, even though they say they're flushable, and they should definitely not be flushed. So it's a good one to make sure guests know about that. According to estimates, I don't know if you can remember, how long did I say it would take a single-use mask to break down? This is our first question. Just one more after this, and we'll be able to see who will win a 30-minute consultation with us to reduce plastic and hygiene in their business. 4 answers in. The results there. And the correct answer is 450 years. I'm not quite sure how they're working that out at the moment, but that's the estimates that are doing the rounds at the minute. And it just goes to show that, you know, for a few minutes of use, we really are creating a lot of problems, especially if these things get into the environment. And finally, when PET bottles are recycled, do you know what the most common product is that they're recycled into? Once you've made your choice, send your answer and we'll take a look at the leaderboard. Just 4 responses. Anybody else want to respond before we move on so that your answer is counted? 6 responses, fantastic. Okay, I'm wary of your time, so I'm going to move this on and take a look. Actually, yes, plastic fibres. So when we use the word recycling, often now there is a new term coined downcycling when products are having to be turned into something else because the material is just not good enough anymore for it to be turned back into the same product. So it's plastic fibres. So let's take a look at who has won. Ricardo with 9 out of 10. So congratulations, Ricardo. You have won a 30-minute consultation directly with me to help you look at plastic and hygiene in your business. The hardest question, it seems, for most with the seabirds and marine mammals. I think that's because I've switched those statistics around. Okay, fantastic. Well done, Ricardo. We'll make sure that we know how to connect later on so that we can ensure that you get your session with us. So I think without further ado, we can move on to questions, Lorraine, or to comments that anybody would like to share, and apologies for going over time.
Thank you very much, Jo. It's been a while since I've been in such a quiz where I actually wanted to win, but had to try and make a conscious effort to let everyone else take the lead because it's a session for you. Congratulations, Ricardo, and I hope that everybody found it as interesting and engaging as I did. I will not talk much, and I will open the floor to any comments or questions. I know Omar had his mic unmuted just before we went into the quiz. I don't know if he wants to start off by saying something, and then everyone else can, you know, just raise your hand or drop a line in the chat to say you'd like to say something. Omar, please feel free to go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Omar here. Yeah, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. I have a question. I've seen like quite a number of participants came from the hospitality, and that means more in accommodation. And myself as a tour operator, were there also others from the tour operations sector? Because tourism is not about only accommodation. It's a whole cycle, right, from transport, visitors, accommodation, and of course, us as tour operators. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Yes, at the very beginning, we did a quick break the ice poll, and a number of people, I think, were also in from a tour operating background. I can't see the answers just at the moment, but there. Oh, let me just see if I can do that without it showing on the screen. So we had 13% of participants are from a tour operating background. Hotels did make up the majority at 25%, and we've also had representatives from restaurants, NGOs, government agencies, and private companies. So it was quite a mixed bag today. And hopefully there's been something in there that would help people to see what steps they could take without it being specifically focused on tour operators. When we have a wide audience, it's hard to choose what that content should be, so it's relevant to everybody. But hopefully there's been something useful, at least to, you know, 1 or 2 takeaways for everybody to take with them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Feel free to unmute your mic, introduce yourself, and make your comment or ask your question. No questions.
Were there any interesting comments, Lorraine? I could see some things in the chat, but I couldn't see what they were. But I could see people were putting things into the chat. Did anybody share any good practices or any concerns?
There was a concern about how easy or not easy it is to get baristas to serve drinks in reusable cups, you know, your own reusable cup. I think that's something that's come up quite a bit. My take on that is that if there are enough people that are beginning to push for that, then inevitably it will become part of the norm, rather than them insisting that they have to follow, you know, like you talked about brand standards, that they have to follow the old way of doing things. It's just about getting to a critical mass where more people are asking for that change. But perhaps there's something else you could add, Joe, in terms of, as a business, what else could you do sort of to encourage your customers to use reusable cups?
Yeah, I think it's one of those changes, isn't it? It takes time to embed, and you know, in the UK, for instance, I'm from the UK. You know, the reusable coffee cup was a huge thing. It was really, really popular. I mean, there were still an awful lot of single-use cups being used, but people had really taken to this reusable coffee cup, and then suddenly they couldn't do it anymore, and many people were very upset by that. And what it needed, and what we're seeing happen now, is it needed these new processes. It needed people to just think about this differently, take away the panic head, put the logical head on, and then look at their communications and how they still reassure their customers that they are doing, you know, the best that they can, but they're doing this hygienically. And the communications can be anything from you know, signage or anything in the window, but it's, in this instance, communication is actually the body language. It's what the staff are doing, what they're physically doing is communicating whether they're doing this in a hygienic way or not. So a lot of it is around training, but it's also important to make the customers feel safe, that, you know, if they see that they put their cup down, you don't touch it, as the barrister, and they just pick their cup back up again, there should be no reason why that isn't seen as hygienic. But it's time and training and just giving people the confidence that they can do it.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. Anybody else with anything to add or any questions?
Is anybody doing anything great that I would love to know about and promote? That would be really nice.
I can see a question in the chat from Elizabeth asking, how can one deal with budgetary challenges in the fight against single plastic use? Any advice?
I think it comes down to the kind of number one that you need to do in the first place is have a look at how much plastic is being consumed. So per item, I don't know what business you're in, Elizabeth, and then look at the cost per unit. So that you would know which ones are creating the most cost for the business, and you would be able to see then applying a kind of logical head using some of the steps that we've gone to today. Can you take some of those single-use plastics out and reduce budgets, or do you need to give it a longer term thought and look at what needs to be invested now, but look at the return on that investment? And you know, one of the great things about Green Key and you know, the support from the Kenya Organisation for Environmental Education is you can also look at other sustainability aspects of the business where it can reduce costs. Food waste is a huge one of those, but looking at energy resource, water resource, so that the savings made potentially come from other areas of the business, and then they can be invested where it might be needed for reusable alternatives or for water filtration. And it's also worth asking, you know, if water filtration is something that businesses are interested in. A lot of the companies do that on a monthly rental. I don't know about there, but where I've worked in other destinations, it's a monthly rental, so it actually makes it affordable to start straight away. And you're obviously tied in to certain terms, but it means you don't have to find a significant amount up front. So it's really getting clear on what your current costs are and looking at where you can make those changes and just finding a way to record that.
Thanks, Joe. If we don't have any more comments or questions, I can't see anything additional in the chat. I'll probably look to wind up now because we've gone over time, but thank you for staying with us.
Sorry.
And just to let you know that there will be a recording of our discussion available, and Jo has kindly agreed to share her presentation as well. And I will be sending information about additional resources that you can have a look at in terms of cleaning products and some of the things that she mentioned during her presentation that are available in Kenya, along with contacts of people that you can have a chat with as you look to switch to more sustainable alternatives. Jo, I don't know.
Thank you, Lorraine. And if I may add a comment just to Ricardo to reach out to me on jo@travelwithoutplastic.com, just so that we can arrange that 30-minute consultation. That would be great. Or if you have his details, Lorraine, you can, from registering, you can maybe put us in touch on email. And just to say, hopefully this won't be the last of these webinars that we do, as we have a collaboration with Green Key International, which reaches all of the Green Key outlets in different destinations. So if there are any other challenges, any other solutions that you think are working for you, and we look at doing future webinars or updates, it would be great to hear from people. And you know, we don't want to make this just a one webinar thing and that's the end of it. We're all in this for the long run, so it's important that we can continue to support each other.
Thank you so much, Jo, and thank you everyone for making the time to join us. I will be sharing information about our upcoming sessions as well after this, and of course, if there's anything burning, you can reach out to us, and we'll be able to see how we can support you from there. Thank you so much, and have a good evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you very much.